We have quite a few people who signed up for our conversation and coffee today. Audrey, I don't know if you have coffee. I actually have water. I hope that's okay.
I have water too, and I'll confess, and I don't want to start any battles, but I'm not a coffee drinker myself. I'm a tea drinker, and I had thought about having a cup of tea with you all, and then just switch to water. There is such thing as a little too much caffeine sometimes.
I completely agree. But I hope I hope you all have coffee or your favorite beverage. I know it's lunchtime for some of you. As I come in, you're going to see me look down occasionally because I have my computer right in front of me. I'm going to invite you all, if you feel comfortable, feel free to turn on your video. And you don't have to, but I know for me, it's really nice to see your faces when I'm speaking and to see your smiles, your nods of understanding, or sometimes, eyes of confusion, and perhaps I'll clarify. But I think in this time when we're doing so much via video conference, the more we see your faces, that's fantastic. But actually, no requirement, because I know not everyone wants to do that, and that's just fine. But if you do, I know we'd love to see your faces. So feel free to turn on your video. I'm seeing now that most folks are in the room. We still have a few folks arriving. And so I'm just going to wait for a few more moments for everyone to get into the room. I think we all realize there's a sometimes complicated registration process that we have to go through in order to get to this point where we can talk with each other. And we have folks joining us from all over the United States and all over the world. And so this just takes a little bit of time for folks to come in and join us. But I think we're in a good spot right now. So I'll begin. Welcome to Conversation and Coffee Conference with Audrey, our president of Reed College. My name is Milyon Trulove. I'm the vice president and dean of admission and financial aid. And you'll notice as you've come into the room, you're on mute. And that's primarily because we have so many people who are here today. It's really difficult for us to have great conversations because sometimes microphones pick up a lot of noise. And also, right now you can't use the chat feature, but I do want to let folks know I'm going to be monitoring the admission@reed.edu mailbox. That's admission, singular, @reed.edu mailbox. And as you have questions or if you need clarification, feel free to send us an email. I'll respond to that and I'll pass that on to Audrey in real time. But I'm going to begin by having Audrey introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Good morning to those in this time zone, afternoon, evening, to others. I'm so pleased to get to spend time with you this morning and to talk with you about Reed College and to help those of you who are considering us think about your decision. It's been a pleasure for me to be part of the Reed community for this past year. As many of you know, I began my Reed journey a year ago, last July, as Reed's 16th president. And I came from a liberal arts background, multiple decades in liberal arts. And so I can say this is a model I believe in, and Reed is a very, very special place. And it's going to be a delight to talk with Milyon and have some exchange about what it is that makes Reed so distinctive and give you a sense of what you might discover here. I know for all of us, this is such a weird time, stressful, alarming, upending. Our lives have been really turned inside out. And so I do want to send also lots of good thoughts to you and yours as you process so much during this time of uncertainty. And I hope that we can help you see your way to, considering your decision within this time. And we're here for you. So thanks.
Thanks for saying that, Audrey. I appreciate that. We have a really good variety of folks here. Many of you, as we noted from the registrations, are admitted seniors, and also a good number of you are juniors who unfortunately haven't had a chance to visit campuses this fall. And we've opened up our events to have you participate because we know this information is critical for you. to decide what schools you pursue in the fall. So we welcome both of you here, also a few transfer students. But I think the content is relevant for all audiences, and for those admitted seniors, we know that you're making a critical decision. We hope this is really helpful for you, and for those of you who might be joining us for the first time, that you learn a lot about Reed. Audrey, I'm going to begin with a question that we probably get most often, particularly these days, because of the current circumstances in which we exist. What are Reed's plans for the fall?
Thanks, Milyon. And I know this is the top line question out there, and many colleges and universities have sent out announcements and have said, you know, we know we're doing this, or we know we're doing that. We are certain of one thing, that we will be offering a full academic program next year, and that students will be able to take classes and make progress toward graduation. We are engaging our community in our decision-making process about next steps. And then, of course, we're going to need to take into account what's happening with the progress of the virus, what it will mean to keep the members of our community safe. And so all of our decisions will be informed by that. So the question of whether we may need to have some form of online instruction for the fall semester or for part of the fall semester is very much up in the air. And we'll have working groups trying to figure out how we can navigate if that needs to happen, so that we can offer the Reed College education that we believe in.
Thanks for sharing that, Audrey. And I think one of the things I've heard you talk about and mention is that it is our deep hope that we're on campus in the fall, but the circumstances are changing so quickly that we really have to adhere to the circumstances, and primarily in keeping their families safe.
Absolutely, Milyon. Let's be clear, nobody wants this, right? Nobody wants to be in stay-at-home situations, or in situations where we're afraid to go to the grocery store or do things that are normal in our everyday lives. And so we all want to get back to the world that we treasure and value, where people come together and see each other face to face. And in our model of education, that face-to-face relational component is really central to what we value so highly. And so even in the mode that we've entered into for this semester, I'm really gratified by the way our faculty have stepped into this space to bring people into relationships even at a distance. And so this is not optimal, just as I would much rather see you all in a room and be with you on campus. That's what we want to get back to, and we will do that in ways that are safe and that protect all members of our community.
Audrey, we've talked about this before. You are in a really unique position because of your previous experience. You have experience with a lot of other colleges, a lot of great places, and you're also here at Reed. And one question I think that we both get is sort of one of comparing and contrasting. You know, when you think about Reed, how does that compare to your other places? When you think about your Reed experience, what would you highlight about it that you think is distinctive, or you think affirms your experiences at other schools?
That's such a great question, Milyon. And I like to actually start by saying that I also have the advantage of having gone through large public higher ed. So I started out at a large public university and got a PhD at another large public university, the University of Virginia, and then started pretty much after my PhD into liberal arts college teaching, and was a faculty member for multiple decades at liberal arts colleges. And for me, when I landed at my first liberal arts college, I thought there's something so perfect about an environment that is so tailored to helping undergraduates at the launching pad of their lives think about what they want to do, how they want to reflect, and also to inspire them with a kind of passion for learning that will last their whole lives. And so I really have gotten to be at the best liberal arts colleges in the country. And what attracted me to Reed and stepping into this position was that Reed is special in terms of the joy that we bring to academic rigor. I think about Reed as a place where there's so much caring for knowledge, for creativity, for research, and it's very community oriented. So when I talk about that relational quality, the relationships between faculty and students are like a partnership, that faculty really encourage students to express themselves in ways that allow a mutual kind of communal framework for learning. And Reed does this really better than any place I've ever been. And I was just talking to a graduating senior today in a Zoom call, and they were saying that they're disappointed, they're not on campus, they're finishing their thesis, but they came to Reed because they love the model and they love what Reed stands for, and they felt called to Reed as a community where people really do care about learning. And they were saying, the student was saying that they love the school and they couldn't be prouder of getting their degree at Reed.
You sort of dropped that in there, Audrey. You had a Zoom call with a senior. Is this something typical that you do, or can current students just come and connect with you?
It's something that I've had office hours for students since I arrived. I have them weekly, and love connecting with students. I walk around campus. I get to have meals with students at Commons. I will note that something that makes a liberal arts college truly special is that we're small. We're staff and faculty and students all connect. At Reed, we're also all on a first name basis, and I personally love that. And I joked when I first arrived that I have the best job I've ever had in the academy, and my other jobs I would be Dr. Bilger or Professor Bilger, and then the best job I have is the one where people call me Audrey, and that's how we are at Reed. And so I love walking around campus, seeing students, checking in with them on how things are going with them. And so to have a Zoom call with this student, I'm actually on the student's thesis board. So I'm reading their thesis and will be taking part in the exam next week or week after.
I think I know this student. I think it's someone who works in the admission office.
It's true.
Audrey, you mentioned something, and it's nice because in a way it connects with something that one of our visitors has also asked. You've been a faculty member. You've taught before.
Yes.
And one of the things I think would be helpful for students to understand is how you see them change and develop over time, say their first year through their senior year. I know this is a true curiosity. The student who walks in is not necessarily the student who leaves. And this echoes what one of our guests said. It seems that there are close relationships between faculty and students at Reed. Is that true? Can you speak to both of those, particularly as a former faculty member?
Absolutely. Well, when I say that I landed at a liberal arts college and thought I'd found a kind of paradise, I will say that one of the things that I realized is I wish I'd had this kind of education. And I was first gen and grew up in the middle of the country and went to a large state school.
And Audrey, what's first gen?
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Milyon. So first gen means I was first generation college student. So my parents did not go to a four-year college or get a degree. So that means that actually in navigating the college experience for me, in going to a large state school when I was an undergraduate, many of the students were also first generation college students. When I ended up in graduate school at University of Virginia, I was in school with a lot of people who'd gone to Ivy Leagues or boarding schools and so that's when I really realized the sense that sometimes you get if you're first gen of feeling behind or, so for me, I actually didn't even know that schools like like Reed or Oberlin or the Claremonts, the schools that I know. I didn't even know they existed. And so, but I did know this when I was a kid in Oklahoma, that I loved reading and thinking and writing poetry, and I didn't have a lot of community in that. And when I first arrived at a liberal arts college, I realized, oh, this is the place where you can go if you care about those things and have faculty and community who care. So going back to your question of how do students grow in the time that they're at college, I will say that because the relationships are closer, and often certainly in my teaching experience, I taught a lot of first year writing classes. And so, I would see students that first year, and if they ended up majoring in English, they might be in multiple classes of mine. So I would see them grow intellectually course by course. And sometimes there would be, students who I didn't see after that first year until I watched them cross stage at commencement, and I would hear, the title of their thesis and think, okay, I knew that student when they first entered in, and they were forming some of these ideas, and this is where they've landed. And so I think that there's something profound about what happens in a small college like this, is that students are seen. You're not invisible. Not only do we call each other by first names, but we know your first name. We care about you. I think that staff and faculty at liberal arts colleges will often say, as you did when you said, oh, I think I know that student whose thesis you're working with. We root for students, we cheer for students, and when they get to that graduation stage, which will be virtual this year, but which we will make up for these students next year, there's a kind of magic in seeing what they have become.
Not many folks know this, but one thing Audrey and I have in common is we're first generation college students and have roots in Oklahoma, which is which is kind of neat. Audrey, you mentioned something, and I'm just going to riff off this for just a moment on a slight tangent. Just this idea of the student crossing the stage their senior year, and what they've come up with for their theses might be dramatically different than the conversation you were having that very first year in that writing course. And I think often for students, and many people have heard me say this, the college search often focuses, at least mentally, on that first year when you get to campus, when you're taking classes for the first time, when you're independent, when you're hanging out with your roommates. And one of the things I encourage people to do is to think about who they are their senior year. And that's much more challenging, but I think it's doable. We admission offices and colleges give you a lot of information, and ultimately what you're trying to figure out is how that will develop you and who that individual is their senior year at Reed versus that individual their senior year at another school. And if you can determine which of those versions of you you're most excited about, it really helps you decide where you want to be for 4 years. I think now that's more important than ever, because next year might be filled with some anxiety. It might not for some of you, but for some it will. So think about your senior year at college, and that'll help clarify a lot of what I firmly believe and know to be short-term in terms of our current circumstances. That's not going to be what makes your 4 years at college. Audrey, can you, so one of the things that you talked about was walking around campus, connecting with folks. I've seen you at theater events. You've come on campus for productions, for actually, I won't spoil it. Tell us a little bit about some of the community events that you've participated in, some that you've liked, some that you think our prospective families would enjoy once they're here on campus.
Well, I mean, one of my favorite things is walking around campus and greeting students. And I think that the smiles that I see when I walk around campus it's euphoric for me. And I try, because I have days that sometimes have a lot of meetings in the office, I try to get out to get some of that energy, and also spend time. Some of my office hours I hold in various places around campus, like the Multicultural Resource Center, or the Center for Life Beyond Reed. In terms of events, I mean, going to theater at Reed is really wonderful because the students go for it, and they, that makes them, I think, amazing to see in theatrical productions. I've gone to student art exhibits, and just I'm dazzled by what students come up with in their imagination. I've actually, one of my favorite events, which I will now go to every year and plan for differently, is the science poster fair that happens at the beginning of the school year, where students present posters on their summer projects. And when I went this last year, my first time, I thought, well, I'm just going to walk through. It'd probably take me about, like 15 minutes. And I was there for over an hour, because at every poster, students were telling me about their projects and explaining their energy. I will note that one of the fun things that I was able to do this year was to go and watch the women's rugby team play, and it was my first rugby game, I'll have to say, when I saw them play. And if those of you who know rugby, it's a special kind of sport. There's a lot of mud involved in rugby, and that was delightful, and it was good to see a few parents there as well.
One of our families asked a question, and I think this is just helpful, considering your background at both large state universities and also liberal arts schools. When we consider STEM, biology, chemistry, math, the sciences, why would a liberal arts school, how does a liberal arts school set up someone for success that might be different than a research university?
The liberal arts model itself, even in fields like STEM, which can be a bit narrower, where students can have to track through a pretty specific series of courses, doing this in a liberal arts environment adds a layer of breadth. So not only do Reed students have the year-long humanities experience of Hume 110, where they're engaged in critical thinking and writing, but also in terms of electives have a range of offerings that is really, this is what makes the liberal arts model distinctive, is that rather than telling students, okay, this is your set of courses you're going to need to take for the next 4 years, which I think sometimes happens at research universities, we say, yeah, these are the courses that you're going to need if you want to pursue that path, and explore. And it's something I've delighted in being connected with students at liberal arts colleges, is to see the way those connections between STEM and other fields cross-penetrate and add a layer of richness. Whether it's a student I once knew who did neuroscience and dance, and then ended up actually with a job in which they were working with a government agency trying to understand body language in order to understand how to read people for security purposes. It sounds kind of sinister, but I think it had to do with like TSA and but the dance and movement, and how do you evaluate movement was a piece of that. And so I think that there are ways in which STEM students themselves get to stretch creatively, even in their science work, science, math, computer science work, because they're in a liberal arts environment. And I will note that from the faculty point of view, liberal arts college faculty in the STEM fields are here because they value this model. And they'll say that our students are able to think critically, write better, put together a paper, explain to a non-scientist at a poster fair how they came up with their idea and why it's important, than if they hadn't had that breadth.
I think your answer is still relevant. I think oftentimes we're looking for some of those concrete examples which you've given. This is not ethereal. This is a real thing. Reed leads the nation in producing PhDs per capita in the STEM fields. We're a small school. We're liberal arts, and this is where students are the most successful in terms of going on into graduate programs. And I'll also note they do more than simply go on to graduate programs. And so these are real case instances of students who are finding success through liberal arts education. One thing I'll mention, it didn't occur to me until after you said that my favorite community event is the Great Reedy Bake Off. Uh, it's just like what it sounds like. Over a course of a few weeks, faculty, students, staff, they bake goods, and they come and they present them. There's voting. It's narrowed down. Audrey, weren't you one of the judges this year?
Actually, my wife and I co-judged this year, and it was such hard work, you know, tasting delicious pastries.
Oh, I feel so bad for
It
you.
was really, really, but no, it's so much fun. And there too, the imagination that went into baking challenges and the kinds of things that students produced was inspirational and also yummy. So that, yeah, that's definitely, it's a relatively new tradition at Reed, and a tradition that I fully endorse.
Absolutely. Audrey, I think folks may not know this, but one of your areas of specialty is humor. Can you share a little bit with our audience about your specialty?
Sure. So I came up as an English lit scholar, studying Jane Austen and 18th century writers, and then also got really interested in how Jane Austen uses humor. And in particular, the ways in which, if you have a kind of stereotype about Jane Austen and love stories, you might think of those as, you know, maybe sappy and sentimental. And those of you who know Jane Austen, I know you're out there, will know that she's incredibly witty, satirical, and also critical of the society around her. And I became really intrigued by that in my graduate studies, and ended up writing a book on specifically Jane Austen's feminist humor and how Jane Austen brings humor to bear on some of the pressing issues of her day. I also, I could talk on and on about humor. And in fact, the thesis I'm advising is one, the student came in and said, or advising, I'm working on the panel, but said, will you be on my thesis panel? I'm doing this thesis on humor. And within a few sentences, I was like, how could I not be on this? But I do think that humor, even though it might seem trivial, engages with some of the most serious matters and can help us cope with some of the most difficult times that we go through. So it's something I think, Milyon, you too bring to your work, that we enjoy a laugh and we find reasons to smile even in difficult times.
Thanks for saying that. One thing, and I know you've touched on Thesis before, but Reed has these two bookends to our education, Hum 110 and Senior Thesis. And I'm not asking for a description from scratch, but can you talk about, just really briefly, those two bookends?
Sure. So the Hum 110, you know, a year-long curriculum in the humanities. All students hear the lectures together and then separate out into conferences to have discussions. It's that kind of a unified humanities experience is not entirely usual. It's actually quite unusual these days in higher ed. And it does give the students something that connects all students, regardless of what majors and minors and configurations of study they might go off into. My office is in Elliott Hall, which is right next to Volume, which is where the Humanities 110 lectures are held. And it gives me great pleasure to see the first years filing into Volume and, you know, recognizing that they're talking to one another about what they're reading and connecting about their reading. And in fact, an experience that I've had in having office hours outside of my own office is being in spaces where students are talking about what they're writing about for Hume, or, you know, so that kind of shared experience at the beginning of the Read experience is really precious. And so then all seniors will write a thesis before graduation. And in that case, they're doing something that was as highly individualized, working closely with a faculty member and then others such as myself on the panel that will be part of their orals exam. And, you know, the student is able to delve deeply into something that interests them, a research question, a project in art or theater or dance and then bring that to life in their senior thesis.
Mhm.
Something I think is extraordinary about Reed. So there are some other colleges that might require a senior thesis of all their students, but I don't think any campus celebrates senior theses with as much exuberance as Reed does. And in this time of separation and distancing, we're trying to replicate some of those ways that we celebrate, and we're finding some of them. We have, for instance, put up a virtual thesis board to put online something that happens in real life when students turn in their thesis at the registrar's office. There's a board outside the office where their names go up. Then there's a parade. Then there's a bonfire where students burn their drafts of their thesis. And then there's a festival that goes on for several days to celebrate. We have a tower, a thesis tower. Those of you who've been able to visit campus have seen it on our website. You can see pictures of this in the virtual tours. But we have a tower in the library that contains bound copies of all the theses from going back into the early 20th century, and they're alphabetized side by side, and you can range around and pull out copies of people's thesis, and yours will go there too. And to me, that there's just, I think that when I came on campus first, walked into the thesis tower, my heart melted.
Mm-hmm. It's epic. It's an epic room.
It is.
We have a few questions about the current circumstances of COVID-19. I've got two questions for this, Audrey. One, and I actually appreciate this one because it really does away with the misnomer that the response to classes are either online or in person. There's in fact a hybrid of in between. There's different models of start time. So maybe you can briefly talk about the models for which you're familiar, but I think more so about perhaps our planning processes. And you've mentioned to other folks on campus the 4 planning groups that we have to help us consider our response to COVID-19 in a way that will help students continue to be safe.
Yeah, this is a time unlike any that most of us have experienced in our lifetime. And so the sort of radical uncertainty means that schools are, all of us are looking at what would it mean to be on campus? What kinds of steps would we need to take if the virus is still raging to ensure that people are able to be properly distanced and safe? We need to know more, I think, before we would make any decision that would say we're absolutely going to be on campus. And yet, the idea that we will work toward that when we can safely do so is fundamental. And I would say that as we think about what we may need to do online, we're continuing to refine what that looks like. And our faculty are really innovative in working in this space as necessary as a temporary measure. For me, I feel good about the response that we've had at Reed to the COVID pandemic because we have, at the places where we've been able to reach out to the community, not only in terms of communications outward, but for instance, for our seniors, our hearts really go out to our seniors. When we realized that we were not going to be able to have on-campus commencement, we reached out to families, faculty, and students to ask, what would you like as a rescheduled commencement? We want very much to give you the chance to do this in person, and offered them options and got feedback, and were able to make a decision based on what the seniors really preferred. And so in the coming weeks, as I'd mentioned, we're putting together groups that will include faculty, staff, and student input, not to vote on, should we be online or on campus, but actually to start to consider how can we make the best of the situation that is going to be the elements that will be out of our control, so that we're able to control the things that we can in order to continue and perpetuate the community and relational models that mean so much to us.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, families have spent a lot of time talking to me and talking to the admission counselors about how we responded in current circumstances so they can imagine how we would respond to future circumstances when you're a student on campus. If you go to the admission website, under the visit link on the left side, it says COVID-19 response. That is a site that helps you understand how the admission timeline has changed since the novel coronavirus took hold. But we also link you to a timeline of Reed's communication to our constituents. And as Audrey alluded to, I'm incredibly proud of how well we've maintained communication with families and communicated often to keep folks up to date with how we responded to the situation. We've also helped in really practical ways, for example, for students who may have had challenges finding ways to get home, or might have found them in circumstances where parents might have had short-term financial financial struggles. We've utilized our emergency fund, and we've been able to approve over 90% of requests for students to find support. And so this has been a community that I've been proud to say has stepped up to help support our families to make as much sense during this time as possible. But I invite you to go click on that link, and it'll take you to many resources that show you what we've told our community and what we've told you as an admission team. Audrey, one thing that often comes up when we talk about our values, when we talk about how we care for folks, is this idea that has been held true for a long time, this principle that's not codified. We call it the honor principle. Can you talk a bit about what the honor principle means for you?
The honor principle is also special, and I know that many of you are looking at other places, and you would know that it's something that not a large number of colleges and universities have. Reed has had the honor principle as a long established tradition, and I would say that fundamentally it's about treating people with respect, being mindful of how your behavior and actions affect one another, and taking responsibility for that. And it means a great deal to be in a community that has an honor principle, something that we can point to as a shared community way of interacting with one another. And I am really grateful to that. At one of my past institutions, I had a group of students who were trying to get an honor principle passed through student government, and they weren't able to. And their energy and idealism was something that I found inspirational. And what they were hoping for was a culture of respect and respect for learning. And I feel so proud of our community and our students and our culture because we do value honor.
I know we're coming towards the end of our time, so I have a couple more questions, and I want to thank you all for submitting your question to admission@reed.edu. As I look at some of these, I'm going to have counselors follow up with every one of you that we don't answer directly. So if your question was very specific, I'll likely have a counselor reach out to you. But if you have a final question you'd like to submit for Audrey, please feel free to send that to admission, singular, @reed.edu. But Audrey, this is a two-part question. So I'm going to give you a lot of information about this. What's your favorite part of campus? Because the student has not been able to visit. And how does the campus engage with Portland?
What was the second part, Milyon?
How does campus engage with Portland? A little bit about Portland and the community, and maybe what you appreciate about Portland, being new to Portland as well.
Great, thank you so much. So first of all, my favorite part of campus is the canyon. And if you're able to do a search to see Reed College Canyon, you'll find that it's a really beautiful natural area right in the middle of campus with water running through it, ducks, beavers, you know, wildlife are running around. And that makes it sound a little like a Disney movie, I know, but it sometimes is actually. We have two bridges that cross the canyon between one of the larger areas for residence halls and the main campus. And when you stand in the middle of the bridges at certain times of day, you'll see trees reflected in water. You're surrounded by a kind of forest area. And there's a 2-mile trail that goes around the canyon where you'll see faculty, staff, community members, students at various times during the day. It's a real treasure. And so I highly recommend it when you're able to come to campus. And so that's definitely my favorite part. I would say that, wait, the second part, and I asked you to repeat it, was
About Portland, how we relate to Portland, or maybe your
Portland.
favorite part about the Portland community.
Portland is a wonderful city. It's been a real treat in the time when we were able to get out and around to get to know Portland better. The way that Reed interacts with Portland, I mentioned that, you know, Portland community members, you know, do come and visit campus and walk around our canyon, and also there are different kinds of events that community members participate in. Students are able to get out. It's really easy to get downtown on public transportation, and we have a lot of events that are available through a fund that's called the Gray Fund, that sends students to, you know, see plays or operas, and also out in the Oregon majestic nature areas, whether it's Mount Hood or some of the trails or the ocean. So I think there's so much that students can explore in relation to Portland and the Pacific Northwest, that it's really a remarkable environment. And I'll note that having spent 25 years in Greater Los Angeles, I wondered what it would feel like to come to a smaller city. It's a special place. Lots of interesting small businesses, a bookstore that takes up an entire city block. Plug for Powell's Books. Good to support them during this time when people can't get in the store. But, you know, a city that can support that, to me, already had a place that in my heart. But I really, we have come to love Portland, and if you're not from this part of the world, I can say you will too.
Coming from the Midwest and those from the East Coast who are familiar with cold environments, I love the weather. It's so moderate. I peek outside my window and I think, should I wear a coat? And I never have to wear a coat like I did in Minnesota. But I love it. So I'm gonna answer a couple of questions quickly, Audrey, and then I'm gonna give you a final word just to make sure we can cover as much as possible. There's someone who's right now working with their 5th grader, and so they poked in a question. I understand that I have my 1-year-old in the other room. You might hear him in a moment. But, you know, is it common for the president to be a part of a senior thesis? At Reed, I don't think it's uncommon. Audrey's new, but, you know, past presidents, I think, have often been invited to be a part of the thesis program. Another junior asked if there are going to be changes to the application process or the requirements. We do have changes coming up next year. Students, while the SAT and ACT will still be required, students can use self-submitted grades. So I know many of you have to pay a certain fee to have it sent to different schools. Just fill it out on the common application or the coalition application, and we'll accept that and use that to evaluate you in the admission process. If you are admitted to the college, you do have to confirm with official test scores. What's different about Reed, we're not part of the US News and World Report. We're not chasing after rankings, which is to say that test scores have not ever been a barrier to folks getting admitted at Reed. If we think you deserve a spot here, we admit you. And so as a result, we know many of you have already taken these tests, but we think that it is a true barrier to have to pay the fee to send it to each and every school. So that's not going to be something that juniors have to do next year. Sorry, seniors, I know you did have to do that, but juniors, that will be waived. And also, we're trying to develop ways to make sure that you can streamline the application process. And so more changes maybe in the future, we'll keep you updated. A question about community gardens. We have community gardens in the area, not on campus, but I'll have an admission counselor follow up with all the families who also ask other questions and make sure that we give you some final answers from an admission counselor. So Audrey, we've got a wide variety of audiences, folks in our audience. What would you like to say before we depart?
Thank you, Milyon, and thank you all so very much for making time to be with us. I know that this is one of the biggest decisions that you make at this stage of your life is where you're going to go to school, and to make it in the middle of so much of turbulence and uncertainty is really difficult for those of you who are seniors. I want to say this about what it means to be connected with Reed. In my view, people often ask me, particularly because I'm still a newbie, how do I see Reedies? What's a Reedie to me? And having met now numbers of alumni, in addition to the students on campus, it crystallizes in this for me that Reedies care. I sometimes say that Reedies are the opposite of diffident. If you've ever been in a situation where you get really excited about something in school, but you kind of think it's not going to be cool to show how excited you are, that kind of diffidence, that's not a Reedie. So, I walk around campus and hear students talking about their classes and the work that they're doing in their creative areas, and they're engaged. There's a kind of engagement. I really value that one of Reed's founding principles is the idea of participatory democracy, and that kind of connectedness, not just to one another here, but to the greater world, is something that I value very highly. I am in higher ed because I believe that education is a public good, and that it's really important to help young people find their way to their lives that will be engaged in the greater world. And so it's my honor and privilege to be associated with Reed College and to be the president. And I would like nothing better than to see you on campus and to get to welcome you personally.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Audrey, and thank you all who've joined us today. Again, I'm so honored that you've chosen to take this time to spend with us to learn a little bit about the college, to learn more about Audrey's leadership. As questions come up, I don't think there's any reason for any of you to move forward without answers. We in the admission office are committed to helping you get the information you need to make an informed decision about what college is right for you. So please take advantage of reaching out. We're here to help. Thank you all, and I hope you have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.